Hey guys, tonight we slip into soft straw sandals, ease open a paper screen door, and find ourselves in the misty stillness of a samurai estate. Somewhere in the outskirts of Kyoto, centuries before alarm clocks, emails, or the soul-sapping tyranny of 8 a.m. meetings. The air smells faintly of cedarwood and rice. You're kneeling on tatami mats so clean you feel bad for breathing on them, and the only sound is the soft chirping of crickets politely winding down their night shift. It's not even sunrise yet, and already someone's inkstone is being ground in the corner. That someone is you. Or at least, you in a much earlier life, when your job involved both slicing things and writing vaguely melancholy poems about plum blossoms. You're a samurai, yes, but not the Hollywood kind who never blinks and only speaks in riddles. You sneeze. You stub your toe. And yes, you occasionally forget how many syllables a haiku has halfway through writing one. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your morning begins with the quiet ritual of existing. You rise slowly, not just to avoid creaky joints, but because swiftness at dawn is seen as uncouth. Samurai are trained not just to fight with grace, but to move with elegance, even when no one is watching. You fold your bedding with geometric precision, the futon edges aligned like battle formation diagrams. Next comes face washing. There's no peppermint-scented face wash here. Just a basin of cool water drawn from the courtyard well, poured with a ladle over your hands. It's cold. Very cold. This is the splash that reminds you that today might include poetry, or violence. Possibly both before lunch. You glance out at the garden, raked gravel in swirling patterns that make no sense until your brain stops trying to understand them. A single pine tree leans dramatically, as if posing for a scroll painting. A heron stands in the pond, so still it might be pretending to be a statue. You bow to no one in particular. Just the morning. Inside the small study, your inkstone sits where you left it last night, a perfectly quiet invitation. You pick it up. There's a satisfaction in the act of grinding the ink, circular motions, rhythmic pressure. It's both meditative and mildly annoying, like trying to fall asleep while someone hums in the next room. Historians argue whether this ritual had spiritual weight or was just a practical necessity. Probably both. Like flossing. You dip the brush, test the tip, and stare at the blank washi paper. The first poem of the day is often the hardest. Not because you're short on thoughts, you've been mentally composing lines since you opened your eyes, but because you don't want to embarrass yourself with something that reads like a moody teenager's diary entry. You begin. Faint morning drizzle washes last night's ash away incense and silence. Could be better. But also, it's not bad for a guy who hasn't had breakfast. You write two more. One is about a bird you thought was an omen, until it turned out to be a neighbor's chicken. The other is too melancholic even for you, so you fold it away discreetly. Even in private, a samurai has standards. Your poetry isn't just a personal practice. It's expected. As early as the Heian period, samurai were encouraged, sometimes commanded, to cultivate both the martial and the refined. The phrase Bunbu Ryodo, the dual paths of pen and sword, was more than just a clever motto. It was how you were judged. Sloppy calligraphy? You might as well have lost your sword in a koi pond. You stretch your legs and stare into the tiny charcoal brazier. Tea is on the way. Someone, usually an underappreciated cousin or monk in training, is preparing it with enough ceremonial steps to confuse a time traveler. It'll be lukewarm by the time it gets to you, but that's part of the charm. Or the test. Samurai life is full of those little endurance trials wrapped in cultural beauty. You hear the distant thwack of bamboo swords meeting. The younger warriors are already at sparring drills. That'll be you in 30 minutes. But not before you finish your morning verses. This isn't leisure, it's discipline. Some daimyo lords reportedly judged promotions not just by battlefield valor, but by the metaphorical skill in their retainers' poems. It's said that one general, whose name is annoyingly lost to history, once refused to recommend a soldier for advancement because his metaphors were overcooked. That's not a joke. That's real career sabotage via floral phrasing. Not everyone liked this poetic pressure. In fact, some samurai grumbled that all this brushwork was turning warriors into scribes. One famously crusty warlord reportedly declared, "I don't need my men writing about do when there's a war on." And yet, later in life, even he published a collection of tanka poems so tender it might make you cry into your kimono. You pause mid-line. Your brush hand aches slightly, and the ink has pooled too dark in the corner. Time to stop. The paper is covered in elegant regret, sleepy observations, and that one slightly weird poem about your dream involving a carp that spoke Latin. You fold the page carefully. Someday, a descendant might find it and wonder what you were trying to say. Or they'll use it to start a fire. Either way, you wrote it. Before breakfast. The sun is starting to rise now, casting golden light through the rice paper walls. It hits the edge of your calligraphy table just so, and for a brief moment, your messy kanji looks profound. Or at least poetic. You set down the brush. Outside, someone shouts, "Machi," which either means breakfast has arrived or a food fight has begun. Both are plausible. Breakfast, when it finally appears, is not the overflowing banquet of a samurai-themed video game. There's no roasted boar, no mountain of rice, and certainly no bottomless miso soup bar. What you get is modest, functional, and, in its own austere way, quite poetic. A wooden tray slides in, carried by a younger cousin who hasn't yet earned the right to speak unless spoken to. He bows. You nod. On the tray, a small bowl of white rice, a sliver of grilled fish, a pickled plum with the personality of a lemon on a power trip, and a bowl of miso that somehow smells both earthy and vaguely like the inside of an old temple. This is not a meal designed to delight. It's designed to center you. To remind you that life is fleeting, stomachs are finite, and true power lies in restraint. You eat quietly. Slurping is acceptable, but today you're in a contemplative mood. The rice is a little sticky, the fish overcooked at the edges, and the pickled plum, omebashi, is doing its best to wake up your entire face. But here's the thing, this isn't the important part of the morning. That happened earlier. With the brush, the poems, the careful arrangement of metaphor and memory. After all, anyone can eat rice. Not everyone can summon the perfect seasonal reference before their first mouthful. Across the courtyard, the clatter of wooden swords echoes like rain on a roof. Young warriors are running through kata, those choreographed patterns that teach muscle memory before thought. You'll join them soon, because you're still expected to fight. Poetry didn't buy your armor. But for now, you lean back slightly, the tatami mat warming under you from the sunlight creeping in. The samurai class, especially during the Tokugawa era, lived under a peculiar set of expectations. Peace had broken out, sort of, and there weren't quite as many wars to fight. That meant more time for introspection, etiquette, and yes, poetry. Swordsmanship was still essential, but now it shared space with tea ceremonies, incense competitions, and philosophical debates about whether the moon was sad or just pretending. Historians still argue whether this shift toward refinement was a sign of cultural evolution or the beginning of the samurai's slow bureaucratic decline. One scroll describes the lifestyle of 18th-century Edo samurai as half warrior, half minor government functionary, full-time noodle critic. Okay, that last part might have been a joke added by a mischievous monk. But the point stands. You rise, stomach comfortably, not excessively, full. It's time. You grab your bakken, a wooden sword polished smooth from years of use, and head to the sparring yard. The air smells faintly of sweat, straw, and faint male competitiveness. There are rules here, and those rules come with unspoken poetry. Each movement, each bow, each strike must contain intention. Your opponent is younger, faster, and has the cocky aura of someone who once bested a cousin and hasn't shut up about it since. You take position. Bows exchanged. And then, it begins. Whack. Parry. Step. Twist. The rhythm is less a fight and more a conversation, conducted entirely in wood and footwork. You're not trying to win. You're trying to perfect the unspoken sentence your body is writing in air. As you move, lines from this morning's poetry flash through your mind. Not in a mystical, prophetic way. More like accidental mantras. Ash washes away. Incense and silence. You duck a strike. Counter. Pivot. You start to wonder if today's poem was maybe about this moment all along. Maybe it was less about the rain, and more about what comes after. The return to form, to function, to readiness. After the match, you bow again. Your opponent looks mildly embarrassed. Maybe because you beat him. Maybe because you quoted Basho under your breath while doing it. Who's to say? Back in the hallway, you pass a small wall scroll bearing calligraphy in bold black strokes. It's a waka poem, a style older than the haiku, with 5 lines and 31 syllables. The ink is starting to fade, but the message still hums like a temple bell. Even in stillness, the pine leans toward the sun's path, not by commandment, but by knowing where it grows, so should the warrior bend. You think about this as you cool down. Poetry for samurai wasn't just decoration, it was instruction. Life lessons encoded in metaphor. Warnings dressed in elegance. And perhaps most importantly, a subtle reminder that you were supposed to have a soul. You return to your room. Not to rest, there's still correspondence to handle, errands to run, maybe even a visit to the local shrine to pray for something unspecific. You pick up the brush again. Not for poetry this time, but for a thank you letter. The act is the same, though. Control. Balance. Flow. The brush must breathe through your hand, or the whole thing collapses into inky shame. One quirky fact. Some samurai reportedly practiced writing by copying out classic poems using water on stone, watching their characters evaporate into nothingness. A metaphor for impermanence, sure, but also a clever way to train calligraphy without wasting paper. Ancient zero-waste hacks. You finish your letter and tuck it into a bamboo envelope. There's something satisfying about sending off a message by hand, sealed with wax, delivered by foot. A slow form of communication that allows thoughts to ferment, age, and arrive with quiet dignity. Like sake, but more polite. Your breakfast has fully settled. You're no longer hungry, no longer stiff, and certainly not just a fighter. You're a person who started the day with a poem, fought a match with grace, and sent a letter with carefully chosen words. That's what makes you a samurai. Not the sword, not the armor, the attention, the discipline, the poetry, before breakfast, during, and long after. You step outside again, this time without your bakken, and let your hands rest behind your back. The courtyard's gravel crunches underfoot with that perfectly unflattering sound, like someone chewing rice crackers behind a curtain. No one's watching, which means you can enjoy a small, guilty pleasure, staring at the clouds and pretending you're on a mountaintop thinking deep philosophical thoughts, when in fact, you're wondering if anyone remembered to air out your armor. The truth is, even samurai need daydreams. And in this culture, daydreams are often where the best poetry begins. You notice a spiderweb glinting between 2 beams, almost invisible unless you stand just so. It's probably new, since you swept yesterday. You pause, tilt your head. The spider is not poetic. It's just doing its thing. But you're already writing a verse in your head. Something like, new morning cobweb / silver thread on sacred wood / what trap waits for me. You try not to feel smug, but admit it, pretty good for a mid-morning haiku. This is the quiet part of the day. The in-between. No one's asking anything of you. The sparring is done, the meal has passed, and even the senior retainers are pretending to do paperwork while secretly napping behind screen walls. You use this time to check on your sword. Not the wooden one, the real thing. It's kept in a separate room. Always. This is both out of reverence and, let's be honest, fear. A katana isn't just a weapon, it's a personality test. One bad grip, one distracted cleaning, and suddenly you're the guy who sliced his sleeve off during maintenance. Nobody wants to be that guy. You kneel before the weapon. Its lacquered scabbard reflects just a hint of light. You unfasten the binding slowly, like unwrapping a sacred snack, and draw the blade just an inch or two, enough to see the steel shimmer. The temper line, or hamon, dances faintly across the edge like a sleepy ghost. Historians still debate whether the katana's mythic status is deserved or just really good marketing. Some argue that European longswords were just as effective, and the whole katana can cut through armor myth is mostly modern movie nonsense. But you don't care about debates. You care about balance, weight, and the fact that this blade was passed down through 3 generations and only dropped once, by your great-uncle during a cherry blossom picnic. You give the blade a respectful nod and resheath it. Ritual matters. Not because it makes you look noble, but because it gives the day shape. Like punctuation in a poem. From somewhere outside, someone is reciting aloud. It's a renga, a collaborative poem built one stanza at a time, like a poetic game of tag. You recognize the voice. It's the older scribe who always smells like incense and once claimed he saw a fox spirit disguised as a monk. You never believed him. Still don't. But his poems are decent. You walk toward the veranda and sit on the edge. The warm planks press gently into the backs of your legs. The scribe's voice floats over the garden wall. First frost on the field / broken hoe left near the gate / last harvest forgotten. You smile. That last line is a little on the nose. But sometimes, obvious truths are comforting. This collaborative poetry is more than a pastime, it's a tradition with serious roots. Entire gatherings have been recorded where 20 or 30 verses were passed around like sake, each person trying to balance humility with cleverness. Some lines were pure art. Others. Let's just say not everyone was born with metaphor in their bones. There's a story of one daimyo who insisted on starting every renga with the phrase, "In the moonlight, rice." No one had the courage to tell him it was a bit repetitive. Instead, they built increasingly bizarre follow-up lines, including one about a frog with no opinions. That one became oddly famous. You take a moment to stretch. Not because you need to, but because it lets you watch a pair of house cats wrestling in the shade like tiny sumo. Even warriors enjoy cat breaks. Your mind drifts to your own first experience with renga. You were 12, and you'd accidentally rhymed something that wasn't supposed to rhyme. Your uncle corrected you with the disappointed sigh of a man who once lost a poetry contest to his wife and never recovered. But you kept trying. And now, you're not the best, but you hold your own. Poetry isn't just part of your day, it's part of your identity. You are trained to see symbols in everything, the curl of steam from a teacup, the way moss creeps up stone, the color of leaves just before they fall. You've been taught that beauty isn't in boldness but in nuance. That the best metaphors don't shout, they whisper. And so you whisper back. Just a quick line, spoken softly to the cat that's now sitting on your sandal. Tail like drifting brush / you guard this veranda well / soft-footed sentinel. The cat sneezes. Which is probably a review. You return inside to change. The ceremonial robe you wore this morning, wide sleeves, stiff collar, slight whiff of mothballs, is swapped for something simpler. You have errands today. A visit to the calligrapher. Possibly a stop at the temple to leave a poem at the gate. That's a tradition here. People leave verses behind like breadcrumbs for the gods. Sometimes the monks read them. Sometimes the wind takes them. You pause at the mirror, not a glass one, but polished metal. Your reflection stares back, calm, composed, and, yes, maybe a little too serious. You try a small smile. It doesn't stick. That's okay. Poetry is serious business. Even when it's not. The brush, the blade, the bowl of rice, it all blends into a kind of rhythm. You didn't realize how comforting that rhythm was until now. The predictability. The morning poem, the spar, the spiderweb. Each one a thread in the quiet tapestry of your day. You take a breath. Not because you're tired, but because it feels like punctuation. Like a pause before the next stanza. Before you step back out into the world and see what kind of metaphors it offers you next. The day is slipping by, the sun hanging low, but there's something that stirs in your chest, a feeling of urgency, as if the shadows are slowly swallowing the time. It's not dread, though. No, it's more like an invitation, a reminder that the next thing is waiting. There's a rhythm to life, yes, but even rhythms need pauses. It's early evening now, the time when the air feels cooler, and the distant thrum of market carts mixes with the fragrance of roasted chestnuts. You step into the hall and find a scroll awaiting you, one of those long, narrow ones that are too dignified to ever be hurried. Your eyes trace the delicate script. It's an invitation, a challenge even, from one of the regional lords. The kind of man who asks for poetry and expects something worthy of it, like a banquet guest who insists his food arrive on gilded plates. And yet, even here, it's not about the poetry, not exactly. It's about the relationship, the giving and taking, the gesture that speaks louder than the actual words. You set the scroll down and stretch once more, feeling the evening wind drift through the open window. There's a moment of hesitation. Some samurai might dismiss this challenge, or at least offer something half-hearted, a line plucked from a famous work, something safe. You could do that too, no one would blame you. But you don't want to. This moment, this piece of paper, this request from someone who believes in the written word, this one demands sincerity. And that's the tricky part. Sincerity in poetry isn't easy. There's a sharpness to it, an honesty that cuts through all the frills. Your sword is sharp, but your brush? That's something else entirely. There's no room for half-truths when the words will be read by a man who judges not just your lines, but the weight they carry. You need to be sure that every stroke of ink contains the right balance of humility and boldness, of silence and sound. You sit down in the corner of the room, cross-legged on the tatami, and pull the brush toward you. The inkstone is already prepared, and the ink smells faintly of charcoal, sharp, like the crackle of a fire. You dip the brush into the black liquid, feeling the softness of the bristles beneath your fingers. The tension builds in the air as you prepare for your own internal battle, the one between crafting a verse that feels right and making sure it's just right enough for someone else's approval. You take a deep breath, as if steadying the hand that holds your blade. The silence here feels thick, almost tangible. You begin to write, slowly at first. Frost on the hills. It's a good start. Too cliché, though. You've used frost before, everyone has. So you cross it out with a swift swipe of the brush. Time to be bolder. The world doesn't need more frost. Leaves falling like words, unheard. You pause. It's not perfect, but it's closer. But what if the Lord doesn't want something quiet? What if he craves drama? Something grand? But no, that's not your style. This is your poem, not his. You refocus, steady your hand. You think about the endless fields surrounding your family's compound. There's something about the endless horizon that calms you, like a blank page. And the moon, there's always the moon. It's a dependable friend, never changing, always there, even when the world forgets. You begin again. Moonrise over fields slash where the wind knows the silence slash better than we do. The words feel right. The tension in your shoulders loosens, and your fingers stop trembling. The rhythm of the brush against the paper hums like a gentle song. You trace the last character, steady and sure, and then lean back to examine your work. It's not grand. It's not dramatic. But it's honest. You feel the weight of it. You feel like the moon itself might be reading over your shoulder, approving silently. But you don't want to stop there. You could, but there's a deeper pulse beneath the surface of your poem. You want more. You always want more. You add a final line, one more whisper, like the wind itself carrying secrets through the rice fields. The last character is a little more delicate than the rest, and you breathe carefully before adding it, making sure the brush doesn't falter. And even the moon waits for dawn. You smile, slightly. There it is. A quiet ending, a small truth. The moon waits for dawn. You're done. You slide the scroll into a bamboo tube, carefully, as if it's something delicate you're sending into the world. You pause for a moment, the quiet settling over you once more. It's strange how much of life, even as a samurai, feels like waiting. waiting for the right moment to strike. Waiting for the words to arrive, ready to carve themselves into existence. Waiting for the moon to rise and for dawn to follow. Waiting for an invitation. One you weren't quite expecting, but welcomed nonetheless. You leave the room with the scroll in hand, feeling light, as if the weight of the day has been lifted. There's no pressure anymore. It's done. There's only the soft sound of your footsteps as you make your way to the messenger who will carry your words into the world. You walk through the hall, passing the usual sights, the bamboo scroll holders, the quiet servant tending to the hearth, the distant call of the birds outside. The routine continues, and yet, it feels like something has changed. A new line, perhaps, waiting to be added to the verse of your life. A verse that will continue long after the sun sets and you sit in silence with only your thoughts and the ever-present brush beside you. And as the evening draws closer, you feel your own place in this long, poetic tradition. It's not just about battles fought or territory gained. It's about crafting meaning out of moments, finding beauty in silence, and knowing that even your smallest lines can echo through time. The sun is fully down now, and the oil lamps flicker to life one by one, their glow reflected in pools of polished wood along the hallway floors. You wander toward the outer balcony of the compound, where the crickets have resumed their tiny orchestral performance. It's a humble soundtrack, but a reliable one, perfect for thinking, and thinking is what you do best when the world softens into darkness. Tonight, there's no patrol, no ceremony, no visiting lord to impress. Just you, a full stomach, and the quiet echo of brush strokes that still linger in your fingertips. But before the night gets too lazy, you have one more task. The poetry's done for the daimyo, but your own journal, that small, thread-bound book you keep hidden behind the armor stand, hasn't had a new entry in days. This, more than any official request, is where your heart rests. The private verses, the candid thoughts, the fragments of dreams that never quite form into haiku. You retrieve the book like a thief stealing from his own past, careful not to creak the floorboards or disturb the quiet. You open to a fresh page, the old ones filled with thoughts like, "For sparrows fought me / for the last plum on the branch / I let them win it." Or, "If I die tonight / please remember I preferred / autumn over spring." Some of them are funny. Some of them are deeply earnest. One is just a list of foods you hated at the last castle banquet: boiled eel guts, fish custard, egg with sugar why. But they all tell the truth. Or at least, a truth that matters to you. Historians still argue whether these private samurai writings were ever intended for posterity or were simply therapeutic, like whispering secrets to the wind. Some say they were part of spiritual training. Others argue they were just a socially acceptable way to complain about how boring guard duty could be. You lean toward the second theory. You begin a new entry. You're not trying to impress anyone, not even yourself. Just document what this particular evening feels like. Tonight, no swordplay / just the moon and my teacup / both a little cracked. You pause. Should you fix that last line? Both cracked might sound a little too dramatic. You consider changing it to still a little warm. But then again, the crack is the point. It's honest. So you leave it. You hear footsteps from the far end of the corridor. A servant passing by with fresh coals for the brazier. You nod politely. He nods back, probably wondering why you're writing poems at this hour with a look like you're pondering the fall of civilization. You close the journal softly, the pages still warm from your hand. There's a feeling of completion. Not of finishing something, exactly, but of balancing a moment. A tiny moment, weighed in ink and paper. As you return the book to its hiding spot, your thoughts drift back to your training years. Not the sword drills, but the philosophy classes, the long afternoons spent listening to elders discuss impermanence, the delicate art of knowing when not to act, and the concept of mono no aware. That beautiful, slippery phrase that tries to pin down the gentle sadness of fleeting things. You think of the plum blossoms. How everyone admires them precisely because they fall so quickly. The samurai code, Bushido, borrows heavily from this imagery. Live beautifully, but accept your fall with grace. Easier said than done, of course, especially when you're dodging arrows or trying to eat rice with 3 broken fingers. Still, the idea sticks with you. Even now, as the wind brushes past the paper screen, lifting it just enough to let in the scent of pine from the garden. You remember a line from one of your teachers, a man with eyebrows like caterpillars and the unsettling habit of quoting poetry mid-sparring. A warrior must wield both the sword and the word, for only one can bring peace. At the time, you'd grunted in response. But now, as you sip lukewarm tea and watch the sky fade from navy to velvet, you understand it a little better. The word is a refuge. The poem, a place where your fears become metaphors, and your victories are measured not in blood but in syllables. That's the irony, isn't it? People think of the samurai as violent men, and yes, some were. Some even liked it. But for most of you, violence was a job. Poetry, that was survival. A place to put all the things you couldn't say aloud. The longing, the loneliness, the realization that you can swing a blade all day and still never cut through the feeling of being human. And there's that feeling again. Not sorrow, exactly. Just the soft melancholy that curls up beside you when the day ends. You pour another cup of tea, now definitely cold, and you don't even mind. From outside, a night bird calls. Somewhere else in the compound, someone's playing a bamboo flute, badly, but with commitment. You smile. That's all you really need sometimes. You rise slowly, your joints creaking in protest. You pretend it's just the floorboards, but who are you kidding? You're not as young as you were when you first wrote. I will not age / just improve like salted fish / slightly more pungent. You whispered that one into your pillow after your 30th birthday. Still your favorite. Now, you step out onto the veranda once more. The sky is clear. The stars look like brushstrokes on silk, as if the gods themselves tried writing a poem and gave up halfway through. You think about writing one more verse, but no. Some nights are better left unfinished. Some feelings don't need punctuation. They just need to be felt, like a distant drumbeat or the echo of a line you'll never quite perfect. So you just stand there, quiet, breathing in the night, letting the poetry exist in your stillness. The night deepens, wrapping the compound in that soft hush where even the bamboo seems to lean in and listen. You walk the length of the veranda once more, your steps slow, your mind trailing behind like an old friend reluctant to be left out. The moon has risen higher now, indifferent and flawless, spilling pale light across the courtyard stones. You pause at the garden gate. This garden is not large, not extravagant, no ornamental dragons or waterfall cascades here. Just a simple arrangement of moss, smooth river stones, and a few twisted pines that look like they've been arguing with the wind for centuries. It's a place for breathing, for letting the edges of your thoughts unspool like loose thread. You push the gate open with a soft creak, and the gravel path crunches gently beneath your feet. In many ways, this garden reflects you better than your armor ever has. It's not loud. It doesn't demand attention. It rewards patience, silence, and the ability to sit still without needing to fix anything. You crouch near a cluster of stones, noticing how one of them is slightly off-kilter tonight, tilted, as if it too had a long day and just needed a break. You adjust it slightly, not for perfection but balance. Gardens like these weren't always fashionable, you remember. Some historians trace the aesthetic back to earlier Buddhist traditions, the idea of creating microcosms of the universe where every pebble carries intention. Others argue that these gardens emerged from boredom, that samurai, when not fighting, needed a meditative outlet to avoid snapping and throwing a sake cup at the wall. Either way, it worked. Here, the boundary between warrior and monk blurs. You're not reciting sutras, and you're certainly not chasing enlightenment. But in raking gravel into neat lines, or pruning a stubborn maple branch until it reveals just the right curve, you learn something deeper than sword forms. You learn how to listen. And right now, the garden is whispering. It's telling you about a time last spring when the plum tree bloomed earlier than expected. About the toad that tried to hide in the lantern basin during the rains. About the little green moss that returned after you thought it had vanished for good. These aren't grand stories. They won't make the war scrolls. But they're true, quiet truths. The kind that only reveal themselves to those willing to stop trying so hard. You rake a few lines into the gravel near the stepping stones, not for any purpose, really. Just to see the pattern shift. Then, a thought drifts in, one you haven't visited in a while. How poetry and gardening seem to share a root system. Both are about placement. About what you choose to leave out. About how a single element, be it word or stone, can change the whole rhythm of the space. You once wrote a poem about this, years ago, after trimming the pine by the koi pond. Too many branches / ruin the tree's conversation / let it speak clearly. You didn't even show that one to anyone. It felt too self-aware. Like the tree was judging you. There's a flicker of movement at the edge of your vision. A moth, large and pale, flutters briefly across your path before disappearing into the night. You follow it with your eyes, half wondering what message it might be delivering, because in samurai folklore, moths aren't just bugs. They're omens. Ghosts. Sometimes even ancestors dropping in for a visit. Usually, they don't stay long. Just enough to make you pause and wonder. You take a seat on the low stone bench under the gnarled pine. The bench is cold, but not unkind. The wind brushes your cheek like the faintest warning of winter. And then, like clockwork, your stomach growls. Of course it does. You skipped the after-dinner snack. Not very Bushido of you, is it? You think about making your way to the kitchen quarters for a late rice ball, but it feels too far now. And besides, hunger sharpens the mind. Or so your poetry teacher claimed. A full belly leads to lazy stanzas, he'd mutter, chewing dried persimmon with theatrical bitterness. You remain seated, ignoring your stomach and focusing on the shape of the night. Somewhere beyond the outer wall, a fox yips, a sharp, lonely sound. You remember the old stories, how foxes are shapeshifters, tricksters. In some tales, they seduce scholars and steal their inkstones. In others, they whisper poems into sleeping ears. You've always wondered, do the foxes write their own verses, or just steal ours? You make a mental note to write that question down later. There's a rhythm to everything here, even in the stillness. The wind gusts. The trees answer. Your thoughts stir, settle, stir again. You aren't restless, not exactly, but there's an itch in your mind that won't quite leave. Like a haiku that won't land properly, a metaphor that resists being pinned down. Historians still debate whether samurai gardens were intended as reflections of inner order or carefully curated chaos. You suspect the truth is somewhere in between. A garden, like a warrior, is never really finished. It just becomes more itself over time. You rise again, dusting your hands against your robe, and turn toward the path back. The lanterns flicker in the hallway, casting soft golden puddles on the floorboards. A servant has left out a pot of hot tea and 2 cups, though no one is there. You pour yourself one. Maybe the second cup is for the fox. Or the moth. Or the fragment of yourself still out there rearranging the gravel. You sip slowly, letting the warmth settle in your chest. There are no battles tomorrow, no urgent duties. Just training. Maybe a visit from a traveling monk. You consider inviting him to the garden. See what his verses might stir in the stones. You set the cup down carefully. The steam curls like script in the air, fading before it can be read. You linger a little longer near the veranda, watching your own breath curl in the cooling air like the smoke from a sleepy incense stick. The night, it seems, is more generous than the day. Less demanding, more forgiving. In this pale moonlight, the sharp edges of your identity soften. You're not retainer, not warrior, not even poet right now. You're just someone barefoot in the dark, mildly annoyed at how tea always tastes better when it's slightly too cold. But rest doesn't come yet, not quite. There's still a ritual left, small but stubborn, the kind of habit your hands remember even when your brain would rather drift away. You return inside, sliding the shoji door closed behind you with that satisfying thwick. The room smells faintly of pine ash and old silk. You sit by the lacquered writing desk again, not for a poem this time, but for maintenance. The kind only a samurai would bother with at this hour. You unwrap your sword. Not for a duel. Not for a display. Just for care. Polishing your katana is less about utility and more about reverence. The blade is fine, of course. It hasn't left its scabbard in a week. But that's not the point. The point is presence. This act, done nightly by many samurai, is a form of meditation, a quiet promise to remain aware, to be ready, even if the next true battle is decades away. You run the soft cloth along the curve of the blade, watching how the metal catches the lamplight. It gleams like still water, not with pride, but with memory. And yet, here's the funny thing. For all its sharpness, all its craftsmanship, this sword has caused far fewer bruises than the Bokken, the wooden practice blade you used during training. That one left your knuckles swollen and your pride repeatedly shattered. You remember a moment during your teens, sparring with an older student who recited poetry mid-fight just to throw you off balance. It worked. He hit you square in the ribs while shouting, "The wind has no form. Slash yet here you stand, like a tree. Slash not smart, just rooted." You couldn't breathe for a full minute after the strike, but part of you admired the rhyme. Historians still debate how deeply poetry and martial training were intertwined. Some claim it was mostly a pastime for the educated elite, while others argue it was a core method for teaching restraint and focus. You know the truth lies somewhere in the mud between. There's a reason poetry was used to describe swordplay, and swordplay to describe poetry. Both require discipline, but also instinct. You can't force a good strike any more than you can force a decent final line. Still gently polishing, you think of the many samurai who never had the chance to sit like this at night, in peace. The ones who marched for years, who died on boats or in sieges, who never wrote anything more personal than a final death verse scribbled in a shaky hand. That's another peculiar tradition of your class, the jisei, or death poem. Supposedly written right before the end, they're meant to distill a whole life into a few careful lines. No fanfare. No drama. Just clarity. Something like, "Falling plum petals. Slash I am not afraid to go. Slash just annoyed it's now." That one you made up. But you might use it, if needed. There's debate among scholars about whether all these jisei are authentic. Some suspect they were written well in advance, edited, revised, even ghostwritten by family members after the fact. You can't say you'd blame anyone. It's hard enough to write a good haiku when you're relaxed, let alone when you're bleeding out in a rice field. Still, you keep a draft of yours tucked behind your favorite inkstone. Just in case. The sword, now spotless, rests across your knees like a sleeping pet. Its silence is comforting. Its weight is not a threat, but a reminder of who you are, where you come from, and the strange duality of a life built equally on discipline and impermanence. You rewrap it carefully, sliding the blade back into its sheath with that whispering finality that always feels like a door gently closing. The lamp sputters as a breeze sneaks in through a crack near the roof tile. You pull your robe a little tighter around your shoulders and stretch your legs. The floor, though smooth and clean, presses cool against your skin. It's getting late. Later than you thought. You could sleep now, and perhaps you should. But first, you find yourself rummaging through the tiny basket of oddments beside your writing desk. A few pebbles from the river trail. A broken comb you keep meaning to fix. A paper scrap with a half-written verse. Why does rice taste best / the moment you drop the last / pickled plum in soup? No idea where that was going. Probably nowhere. But you smile anyway. From outside, the wind carries the faintest trace of someone else's laughter. Probably the night watch sharing a story, or a servant joking about which nobleman eats the most pickled radish. You feel no urge to join them. The solitude tonight is enough. It wraps around you like a heavy quilt woven from moonlight and tea stains. You lean back, stretching until your spine cracks, quietly, so the ghosts don't scold you for being ungraceful. As you lie down on the tatami mat, staring at the ceiling's wooden beams, you feel that peculiar satisfaction of a night well spent doing almost nothing. Not wasted. Not idle. Just lived. like a breath held and released. You think, briefly, of tomorrow morning, of how you'll rise early, long before the rest of the household, to scribble another verse by the brazier. Maybe something about moths, or foxes, or the particular sadness of warm tea that goes ignored. But for now, your eyes grow heavy. The sword rests nearby. The poems are tucked away, and the moon, ever watchful, leans gently against the roof tiles above. You wake before the sun. No alarm, no rooster, just that deep internal rhythm that samurai seem to be born with, or at least scolded into by their 4th birthday. The room is still cloaked in the dreamy charcoal gray of pre-dawn, and everything feels suspended. Sound, movement, even the air itself, which tastes a little like cooled ash and pine dust. You sit up slowly, joints muttering quiet complaints. No one else in the house is awake, and that's just how you like it. You shuffle to the sliding door and open it with a gentle shhkk, stepping out onto the cold wooden planks of the veranda. You pause, inhaling deeply. The scent of dew on dry grass, faint smoke from the night watch's fire, and something else, the start of another day you didn't ask for, but will greet anyway. The sky is just starting to bleach at the edges. A pale indigo with streaks of peach. You stand there barefoot, arms crossed inside your robe, not thinking much of anything. And yet somehow, this is when the best verses arrive. Even shadows yawn before the rooster remembers his one job again. You whisper it to yourself and chuckle. It's not your finest, but there's something satisfying about getting a haiku out before breakfast. It's like tricking the universe into believing you're productive. Poetry, at this hour, feels more honest. There's no audience yet. No one to impress. The verses don't have to be brilliant or clever or suitable for recitation before a feudal lord. They just have to be true. You slip back inside and light a small oil lamp. Its glow flickers uncertainly, casting long, soft-edged shadows across the tatami. You sit at your writing desk, take up the brush, and gently dip it into the inkwell. The paper waits. Blank, expectant, but not in a judgmental way. Like a friend who's willing to listen before coffee. Historians still argue whether these early morning writing rituals were widespread among samurai or limited to a small, unusually reflective group. Some sources suggest that warriors wrote poetry as a political gesture, proof of culture in a class increasingly seen as brutish. Others believe it was simply a matter of survival, a small act of beauty in a life defined by violence, like planting flowers on a battlefield. You're inclined to agree with both. You think of your teacher, an old swordsman with more missing teeth than working joints, who insisted that, if you can't describe morning dew in 17 syllables, you have no business drawing a blade. He once made an entire dojo rewrite their morning verses after declaring them emotionally constipated. He had a point. Your own verses have shifted over the years. At first, they were clumsy imitations, lots of misty mountaintops and wistful stares into tea bowls. Now, they're simpler. Less about impressing and more about noticing. You finish a short poem about the way your sleeve brushed the inkstone and nearly toppled it, then decide that's enough for now. The brush gets rinsed, the paper set aside. The sun is properly rising now, cutting low golden shapes through the wooden slats. And your stomach grumbles. Ah, breakfast. But not yet. First, the stretching. You move to the center of the room and begin your slow kata, the morning forms. No weapon, no rush. Just breath and body in concert. The wooden floor is cool underfoot, and your joints creak their way into wakefulness. Each movement flows into the next, a sweep of the arm, a step forward, a balanced turn. These are not battle techniques, not really. They're reminders. You are alive. You are breathing. You exist in this space. You wonder if poets of other nations do this. Stretch between stanzas. Shadowbox with metaphors. Some mornings, you do the kata with your eyes closed, imagining you're practicing on the edge of a cliff. Other days, like today, you let your gaze soften, absorbing the familiar shapes of your room. The stack of firewood. The worn sandals by the door. The old crack in the ceiling beam that resembles a startled turtle. Your teacher used to say, A sword that's only drawn in battle will rust with fear. The same, perhaps, applies to the soul. Once the form is complete, you bow to no one in particular. Just the space, the quiet, the day. Then you shuffle off to breakfast. The kitchen is awake now. A sleepy servant hums a folk tune as he stokes the embers. The rice is warm, the miso soup just salty enough to open your senses. You eat slowly, savoring each bite. Not out of formality, just because it tastes better that way. You overhear snippets of conversation from the garden path. Something about a loose chicken. Something else about a visitor arriving by dusk. The day is beginning, and with it, the slow layering of roles. Samurai, host, instructor, poet. You wipe your hands and look out the window. A crow lands on the fence, tilting its head in that smug way only crows can. You nod at it, silently promising to steal its attitude for a poem later. Black-feathered tyrant / surveys breakfast like a lord / finds my soup lacking. You file that one away, too. And just like that, you're ready. Not for battle, not for glory, but for another day of small, deliberate gestures. A word here. A turn of the wrist there. The patient discipline of noticing. The sky is bright now, washed in gold and breeze. Somewhere in the estate, the training yard waits. But you're not in a rush. Let the other warriors charge at the day like it's a fortress to storm. You'll arrive when the verse does. The crow is gone by the time you finish breakfast, replaced by the soft rustle of a bamboo broom scraping the courtyard clean. Somewhere in the compound, the clack of wooden practice swords has begun, early risers eager to get their bruises out of the way before the heat sets in. You stretch your arms above your head, then roll your shoulders with a satisfying crack that sounds, frankly, a bit more dramatic than necessary. You head outside, sandals slipping onto your feet like old friends. The path to the training yard is familiar, etched into your morning routine as surely as tea and syllables. You follow it not out of duty today, but out of habit, which in samurai terms is almost the same thing. The morning is crisp, and sunlight winks through the tall pine trees in staggered slants. You pass a gardener carefully pinching wilted leaves from a bonsai tree. He doesn't look up, but you give a nod anyway. Respect for detail. Respect for patience. You're in the same business, really, just with fewer leaves. As you approach the dojo yard, the sound of practice sharpens. Grunts, yells, the flat clap of wooden swords meeting in mid-air, and the occasional indignant "ow" from a younger student who thought they could block with their wrist again. You pause at the edge of the yard. Watch. Two apprentices circle each other, bakken raised, knees bent. Their movements are clumsy, energetic, and utterly sincere. It's like watching two cats play chess, adorable, and vaguely impressive if you squint hard enough. Your mind wanders, just a little, back to your own early days. The sting of bamboo across your forearms. The silent, looming figure of your instructor, who somehow managed to critique your stance, breathing, and entire personality with one skeptical eyebrow. There's debate, even today, about how young samurai began their training. Some say it started at 5. Others argue 7 was more typical, with formal weapon training around the age of 10. Either way, you remember feeling very small and very sure that poetry was less painful than swordplay, though not by much. You step onto the practice floor, drawing attention like a sudden wind. The students straighten, some awkwardly bowing mid-duel. One of them, eyes wide, nearly drops his bakken. Carry on, you say. Unless one of you has already written a death poem? A few nervous chuckles. They return to their sparring with slightly better posture. You don't join the practice immediately. Instead, you pace the edge, observing. There's something deeply satisfying about watching other people struggle with something you used to find impossible. You recognize every mistake, the too high shoulders, the sloppy footwork, the way they exhale like startled deer instead of focused warriors. Eventually, you find an opening. A lull between rounds. You step in. Your bakken is plain, scarred from years of use, the tip slightly blunted from one too many gentle corrections. You hold it loosely in one hand, the way you hold a brush when you're not sure if the ink's ready yet. A senior student volunteers to spar. You nod. She's good, better than most. Strong wrists, sharp eyes. No poetry, though. Not yet. You bow to each other, then begin. The match is quiet. No yelling, no showmanship. Just the steady rhythm of feet sliding, blades tapping, breaths sinking. You deflect her strikes with practiced ease, not because you're better, but because you're slower, and slower means calmer. Which, at this stage in life, is kind of the same thing. After a few exchanges, you pause. You're rushing the second strike, you say, gently. Like you're trying to finish the sentence before you've heard the question. She frowns, confused. Write the poem, you continue, before you read it out loud. Still confused, but she nods. They always do. Whether they understand now or a year from now, that part doesn't really matter. Historians still argue about how metaphor was used in samurai instruction. Some believe it was mostly poetic flair, meaningless but beautiful. Others suggest it was a core teaching strategy, helping students bridge the gap between combat and contemplation. You know, it was both. Some lessons stick better when wrapped in mystery. You finish the match without fanfare. No final blow, no dramatic flourish. Just a pause, a breath, and a bow. That's enough for this morning. The students disperse, some limping, most grinning. You sit on the porch, sipping from a gourd of cool water. Your knees protest a little as you fold them under you, but nothing serious. The day is still young. One of the youngest apprentices, a boy no older than 10, shuffles over, holding a folded scrap of paper. He offers it without a word. You unfold it slowly. A haiku. I hit sensei once. He did not hit me back. Why? Is this a trick, though? You laugh, a low chuckle that surprises even you. Not bad, you say. Work on your third line. He beams, then scurries away. Moments like that make the bruises worth it. You sit quietly for a while longer, watching the training yard empty out. The sound of a sparrow singing somewhere above. The breeze fluttering the hem of your sleeve. The world, briefly, feels as light as your bakken. You lean back, letting your head rest against the wooden pillar. Your eyes close, not in exhaustion, but in something closer to contentment. The sword, the poem, the morning match, different verses of the same stanza. And it's only mid-morning. The courtyard is quiet again, save for the occasional clatter of bamboo leaves brushing together, like the sound of pages flipping in a book written by the wind. You stay seated a little longer, listening to nothing in particular. There's something restorative about the middle part of the morning, when the chaos of training has ended, but the demands of duty haven't quite found you yet. You're not free, exactly, but you feel unbothered, which is as close as it gets. Inside, someone strikes a gong, low and resonant. It's not for battle. It's not even particularly urgent. It's the kind of gong you ring when tea is ready, or when someone important has decided they might grace your presence. You sigh and rise, dusting flecks of gravel from your knees. Back inside your quarters, you rinse your face with cold water, comb through your hair, and swap your training robe for something more presentable. The layers go on easily, muscle memory doing most of the work. Cotton, silk, a stiff collar. You tie the sash just tight enough to say, "I care," but loose enough to whisper, "But not that much." The visitor is waiting in the small audience room, one of those carefully neutral spaces with sliding screens, painted panels of cranes and reeds, and exactly 0 chairs. You kneel across from her, offering a polite bow. She's older, dressed simply but with intent. Her hair is streaked with gray, and she carries herself like someone who's seen enough battles, on and off the field, to know when to speak and when to wait. You exchange pleasantries, the sort that are more performance than content. The weather. The quality of tea this season. The price of ink. And then, when enough silence has ripened between you, she says why she's really here. My grandson refuses to read poetry. You blink, momentarily disarmed. This is the emergency? He says it's boring, she continues. He says real samurai don't write about frogs and moonlight. Ah, there it is. You nod slowly, trying to keep your tone even. Has he ever written a verse himself? She smirks. He says he's too busy training to waste ink. You glance down at your own fingers, still faintly stained from this morning's haiku. You think of all the warriors you've known, brave and bloody and glorified in song. Many of whom, in quiet moments, scribbled nervous verses behind battle tents or on the backs of rice wrappers. The popular image of the samurai, as a stoic, blood-slicked statue, isn't wrong. It's just unfinished. Historians still argue whether poetry was truly integral to samurai identity, or just a fashionable hobby among the upper classes. But the written record suggests something deeper. Entire war journals littered with tanka, battle reports padded with prose, death poems carved into the sides of helmets. You remember one particularly bad winter, trapped in a mountain pass for 5 days during a campaign gone sideways. The snow was so deep your horses had to be dug out of it each morning like reluctant potatoes. Spirits were low. Morale was a concept no one dared say out loud. And still, someone managed to write a love poem in the middle of it all. You shared it around the fire. It was awful. Too many metaphors. But everyone laughed. And for a few minutes, no one noticed how cold their feet were. You tell the woman this story, and her smile softens into something warmer. Will you speak to him? She asks. You nod. Of course. Later that afternoon, you find the boy in the side yard, practicing kata alone. His form is good, too good for someone who dismisses poetry. There's grace in his movement, even if he hasn't realized it yet. You don't introduce yourself. Just watch until he finishes a sequence. Nice turn, you say finally. He startles, then tries to mask it with a shrug. It's nothing. Funny, you reply. Most poetry starts with nothing, too. He frowns, sweat dripping from his brow. Poetry's for courtiers. You sit on a low stone wall, stretching your legs out in front of you. Tell me something, you say. When you strike, what do you feel first, your hands or your breath? He opens his mouth to answer, then hesitates. I mean, you continue. Is it force? Focus? Regret? Hunger? He scowls. I don't feel anything. I just do it. You nod. That's still a feeling. He looks confused, but not entirely dismissive. You stand and pick up a short branch from the ground, dragging it in the dirt. With a few strokes, you carve a quick haiku. Blade swings in still air / sparrow leaves the branch uncut / war waits for springtime. You don't explain it. You just leave it there in the dirt, nod once, and walk away. Sometimes, the best poems are the ones never claimed. Later that evening, as the sun dips behind the hill and the air turns that soft lavender blue, you see him again. He's sitting by himself on the porch, scratching something into a sliver of bark with a charcoal nub. You don't interrupt. You just walk past slowly, pretending not to notice. But you do. You notice the way he holds the bark with both hands, carefully, like a sparrow that might fly off at any moment. You notice that the charcoal stain on his sleeve matches the one on your own. Poetry isn't mandatory for a warrior, but it's contagious. Word count, 1063. By the next morning, the bark poem has mysteriously appeared on your doorstep. No signature, just a few slightly smudged kanji scratched with the intensity of someone who was either very nervous or using the wrong end of the charcoal. You don't smile outwardly, but your eyebrows definitely try. Why do old warriors / speak in riddles and long sighs? / is this enlightenment? Not bad. A little cheeky. Not entirely sure of itself. Which, in poetry, is often the right tone. You slip it into your sleeve and begin your morning as usual. Tea, ink, brush, and a moment of silence for your knees as you fold into your writing posture. You jot down a quick verse of your own in response. Nothing too elaborate, just enough to keep the conversation going without making it obvious you're engaging. Some truths come slowly, / like swords drawn in sticky heat, / or teen boys with pens. You chuckle to yourself and move on. The scroll you unroll today is not for poetry, but for correspondence. Letters from distant provinces, clan messages, and a particularly thick one sealed in green wax, your cousin's signature flourish. You open it with a sigh. She always writes like she's trying to win a literary contest and insult you at the same time. Sure enough, if you're still playing monk in that sleepy province, I'm sending you a gift to shake off the cobwebs. Her name is Tomo. She has questions. Try not to bore her into rebellion. That sounds promising. By late afternoon, the gift arrives. Tomo, a young woman not much older than the boy from yesterday, but with a gaze that could slice through bad calligraphy. She wears traveling robes and carries a short sword tied in the most unnecessarily complicated knot you've ever seen. I was told you're wise, she says. Whoever told you that, you reply, owes you an apology. She doesn't laugh. That's fine. Some types take longer to warm. You offer her tea, which she accepts stiffly. She sits opposite you on the porch, cross-legged with practiced posture. A samurai's daughter, maybe. Or a merchant's child with delusions of Bushido grandeur. It's hard to tell this early. She doesn't waste time. Why are samurai taught to write poetry? Ah, there it is. The reason she was sent to you. Not because you're particularly wise, but because you'll actually answer. You consider for a moment. Tell me, you begin. When you sharpen your blade, what do you listen for? She frowns. The burr, the sound of the metal against stone. And when you miss that sound, I stop. I realign the angle. You nod. That's poetry. She raises one eyebrow. Sounds like maintenance. Exactly. There's a long pause as the idea lands, softly, like a leaf on the surface of a still pond. Poetry is how we sharpen ourselves, you continue. Not just our minds, but our perceptions. How we notice small things, true things, things that don't make noise. She's quiet now, thoughtful. The wind ruffles her sleeve, and she absently smooths it down. There's an old story, you say, about a warrior who wrote his death poem every morning, just in case. By the end of his life, he'd written over 1,000. Some good, some dreadful, some so honest they made people weep. Tomo narrows her eyes. That sounds exhausting. It is, you admit. So is staying alive. Historians still debate whether the samurai death poem was a daily habit or a final flourish, some ritualized punctuation before exiting life's stage. But many warriors took the tradition seriously. They didn't wait for death's door to open. They knocked first. Daily, even. It wasn't just about readiness. It was about noticing that you're alive. You watch as Tomo processes this. She pulls her sword slightly from its sheath, checking the glint of the blade in the slanting light. Do you write one every morning? She asks. I try, you say. But sometimes I just write about soup. She almost smiles at that. Almost. Later, you show her the scrolls, rows upon rows of handwritten verses, some yours, some copied from others long gone. You explain the styles, waka, tonka, haiku, the syllables, the rhythm, the weird, unspoken rule that you're not allowed to take yourself too seriously, even when facing death. She reads in silence. You let her. There's no rush here. That's the whole point. After a while, she asks to borrow a brush. You hand it to her, and she writes. Slowly, carefully. When she finishes, she hands you the slip. Spring light on blade edge / I do not fear what may come / but I wish for rain. You nod, approving. She watches you closely, waiting. I've seen worse, you say. I've written worse. And this time, she does smile. Later still, you find her sitting under the old plum tree, scribbling furiously onto scraps of paper like a storm trapped in a kimono. You leave her alone. Inspiration is a fragile animal. Startling it is a crime. But you do write one final verse before bed, to close out the day. A blade can cut flesh, / a word can change a lifetime, Both are worth the wait. You tuck it into your journal, snuff the lantern, and lie back on your mat. Outside, Tomo's paper rustles in the breeze, and you're almost certain she's writing about you. Word count, 1050. You wake to rain, soft, steady, and oddly rhythmic, like the world has taken up drumming on rooftops with gentle fingers. No thunder, no wind. Just a hush that mutes the usual morning clangs of training and clatter. It's the kind of rain that makes everything feel like a painting that hasn't quite dried yet. Your first thought is that Tomo got her wish. Your second thought is, this would make a good opening line. You rise slowly, not out of laziness, but to savor the sound. You've always believed that rain makes the best background music for poetry, or tea, or napping, or existential dread, if you're feeling especially introspective. After breakfast, rice, pickles, and a miso soup that may or may not be just yesterday's broth reheated, you find yourself back at your writing bench, brush already in hand before you realize your body has autopiloted itself into creative mode. Tomo arrives soon after, trailing damp footprints and holding a scrap of cloth over her head like a half-hearted umbrella. She looks mildly annoyed, which you've learned, is her default state of deep thought. "I had a dream," she says without preamble. "I was dueling with a poet. Did you win?" She shrugs. He recited a verse mid-strike. "I got distracted." Classic poet move. You nod solemnly. You pour her tea. She accepts it, but stares into the cup as if expecting it to rhyme. "Do you ever worry," she asks quietly, "that poetry will make you soft?" It's a fair question. One many samurai, especially the younger ones, carry like a hidden itch they're not allowed to scratch. Poetry and steel seem like strange bedfellows. One sings of plum blossoms, the other bleeds through armor. You lean back and gesture out toward the rain-slick courtyard. "You ever try crossing wet tiles in full armor?" you ask. She snorts. "Yes." Then you know, balance matters more than brute strength. She doesn't respond, but you can see the metaphor settle into her like a pebble in a pond. There's a well-worn phrase among the older warriors, "The brush tempers the blade." Historians still argue whether this was literal philosophy or convenient branding for the literate elite. Either way, the samurai class leaned heavily into duality, the idea that a warrior must be both cultured and deadly, graceful but not weak, educated but not idle. You point out that Musashi, yes, that Musashi, the duel-loving, cave-living sword icon, also painted serene ink landscapes of birds and plants between slicing opponents in half. "So did he write poetry too?" she asks. "Probably," you shrug. "But I doubt he showed anyone. In some circles, poetry was as private as prayer. Men recited death poems in solitude, wrote love verses they'd never send, jotted observations about frogs and moonlight and sleeplessness in the margins of war reports. And while Tomo might not know it yet, she's already begun doing the same. You've seen her scratch down little phrases in the sleeves of her training scrolls. She hides them quickly, like secrets, but they're there. The trick is not in teaching someone how to write a poem. It's in showing them they already are. To make the point, you suggest a simple exercise. "Describe this rain," you tell her, without using the word rain. She looks suspicious. "Trust me," you say. "No one's ever been assassinated by metaphor." She mutters something under her breath, possibly, yet, but sets her cup down and picks up the brush. A few hesitant strokes. Then more confident ones. Then a pause. Eventually, she hands over her work. The sky breathes softly / rooftops bow in silver sighs / footsteps fade like ink. You read it slowly, then again. Not bad. You might even say beautiful, if she weren't watching you like a hawk in judgmental eyeliner. "Keep it," she says before you can compliment her. "Or burn it." You tuck it into your sleeve. That's your way of saying thanks. Later that afternoon, the rain fades. The clouds thin out into that pale parchment gray that seems to ask for ink. You wander out to the edge of the training yard, where the bamboo fence has sprouted moss and the puddles reflect the sky like second thoughts. You remember a day like this from years ago, waiting in ambush during a skirmish along a mountain road. Your commander, impatient and damp, had written a sarcastic poem about how glorious wet armor wasn't. He'd shared it with the squad in a deadpan voice, and you'd all tried not to laugh loudly enough to give away your position. He died 2 years later, blade in hand, with a death poem half finished in his pack. You finished it for him. You still recite it sometimes, under your breath, like a borrowed prayer. Tomo interrupts the memory. If I challenged you to a duel, she asks, would you accept? You raise an eyebrow. Right now. In this weather. She nods. You grin. Only if we duel in verse. She groans, but the edge of her mouth twitches. I'm serious, you add. Each strike, a line. First to falter loses. It's a joke. Sort of. But it's also a real practice, known in some schools as yuta aways, or poem matching, a kind of competitive verse exchange that could become surprisingly intense. And in some cases, yes, samurai did duel with poetry. Maybe not to the death, but definitely to the blush. Tomo accepts your challenge in spirit, and the two of you trade verses while pacing the porch. Back and forth, like a sword kata made of syllables. You keep score mentally. She's winning, narrowly. Evening sets in, the clouds retreating like curtains pulled back on a quieter stage. Someone brings soup. You eat with your brush hand still ink-stained. Tomo finishes one last line, then sets down her cup. I don't think poetry makes you soft, she says. You nod. Good. Because it doesn't. Then she tilts her head, considering. I think it makes you dangerous. You blink. That, you say, might be the most poetic thing you've said all day. The morning comes with a hesitant sun that peeks shyly through the thinning clouds, casting a muted gold over the courtyard. The dampness clings to the wooden beams, and the faint scent of moss rises from the stone path, like nature's quiet applause for the rain's retreat. Tomo is already awake, perched near the window with a scroll unrolled before her, her brush moving with more confidence than yesterday. You catch her humming a tune that doesn't quite belong to any known court song, perhaps a childhood memory, or a new melody crafted from lingering dreams. You pour 2 cups of tea, the steam curling like soft whispers, and settle beside her. The silence between you feels comfortable, not forced, a shared space that needs no explanation. She breaks the quiet. I tried writing a death poem last night. You raise an eyebrow. That soon. Most wait until their hair turns gray, or their knees protest too loudly. She shrugs. I thought it would help me sleep. You nod thoughtfully. It does, in a way. Writing your own farewell teaches you to notice the present. You both know the custom well, the jisei, the death poem. A brief verse reflecting on mortality, impermanence, and sometimes, a final smile at the absurdity of life. Samurai wrote these as a way to prepare themselves mentally for death's inevitability, a poetic farewell that turned fear into acceptance. Historians still debate whether this practice was a sincere spiritual exercise or a social ritual to maintain dignity. Either way, the jisei remains one of the most poignant traditions of the samurai. Tomo's eyes linger on the swirling ink in her cup. I wrote about a cherry blossom falling. You smile. Classic. The cherry blossom is a fierce metaphor, beauty and death intertwined. You recount a story from your youth, a famed samurai poet who, upon hearing of a rival's challenge, composed a jisei before leaving his home. His death poem was so moving that even the opponent spared his life, moved by the quiet strength of the words. Whether true or legend, it illustrates how poetry could wield power beyond the battlefield. She listens, captivated. You sense her walls lowering, the fierce armor around her curiosity softening. You decide it's time to share a quirkier fact, something less polished, more human. Did you know, you say, that some samurai used to write their jisei in the morning, then carry the paper folded in their armor all day? They believed if death came suddenly, the poem would be ready. Tomo's eyes widen. That sounds practical and poetic. You laugh softly. Yes. Nothing like having your last words ready, just in case. Some even wrote terrible poems on purpose, so no one would expect much. She smiles, the hint of mischief returning. A humble brag death poem. Exactly. The afternoon drifts lazily by. You guide her through the nuances of form, how the syllables must flow like water, neither rushing nor dragging. You show her how to find poetry in the mundane, the crackle of firewood, the twitch of a sparrow's wing, the fading light on worn tatami mats. You also mention an odd scholarly debate, whether these poems truly reflected the samurai's inner world or were stylized performances for social display. Some say they hid raw emotion beneath layers of polished words, others argue the verses were sincere acts of contemplation. Tomo seems to ponder this deeply, her brush hesitating before she writes again. As evening falls, the air cools, and you both sit outside watching the stars emerge like faint whispers on black silk. You talk about how poetry, for the samurai, was more than art, it was a way of life. A discipline to sharpen perception, temper emotion, and connect with fleeting beauty amid uncertainty. Before the night deepens, you ask Tomo to share her favorite verse so far. She recites softly. In twilight's embrace, / the sword rests beside plum blooms, / awaiting dawn's call. You nod appreciatively. Not bad for a beginner. She laughs, a sound that's less guarded now. You offer one last thought before parting. Remember, poetry is like your blade, it's not just about fighting others, but about mastering yourself. She bows slightly, eyes shining with a newfound respect. As you watch her retreat into the shadows of the corridor, you feel a quiet satisfaction. Teaching someone to write poetry is teaching them to live more fully, to listen more closely, and perhaps, to sleep more peacefully. And maybe, just maybe, to face tomorrow's battles with a steadier heart. The dawn breaks gently, casting pale pink hues across the rice paddies beyond the compound walls. You step outside barefoot, feeling the cool earth press softly between your toes. The air smells faintly of damp grass and fresh beginnings, a perfect setting for reflection. Tomo joins you quietly, her footsteps muted by the morning mist. She carries a small notebook wrapped carefully in cloth, its edges frayed from use. You can tell she's been writing again, perhaps even dreaming in verse. You walk together along the narrow path toward the garden, where a single plum tree stubbornly clings to its blossoms despite the season's chill. The delicate flowers sway faintly in the breeze, petals like whispers against the sky. You pause beneath the branches, watching a bee explore the blossoms with meticulous care. It's a small dance, life's ordinary poetry in motion. Did you know, you say softly, that many samurai practiced calligraphy alongside poetry? The art of writing was considered as vital as the art of swordsmanship. Tomo nods. I've seen the brush strokes. They're like another kind of swordplay, delicate, precise. You smile. Exactly. Each stroke a measured movement, each character balanced like a stance. You recount a curious tidbit. Some samurai carried specially crafted brushes tucked into their armor, ready to jot down inspiration even in the heat of battle. A warrior poet might pause mid-fight to inscribe a verse on a leaf or piece of bark. Historians still debate how common this actually was, romanticized storytelling or practiced reality. But the idea itself is evocative, isn't it? The thought of a blade pausing for beauty amid chaos. Tomo brushes a stray petal from her notebook. It feels strange to think of poetry as part of combat. Strange, yes, you agree, but also practical. Poetry sharpens the mind, teaches patience, and calms the spirit. All useful in a fight. You gesture toward the garden path winding through moss and stones. Imagine a samurai walking this path before battle, composing lines in their head like a secret ritual. She closes her eyes briefly, the light catching her eyelashes. You continue. Some schools even held poetry contests, where warriors competed not with swords but with words. The stakes were pride and honor. You share a lighter moment. A famous samurai reputedly lost a duel of verses after accidentally mixing up his ink with sake. The resulting slurred characters amused everyone, including his opponent. Tomo laughs softly. That's a relief. Even warriors have off days. You nod. Indeed. And that's the beauty of it. All the discipline in the world can't stop a little human error. As afternoon fades into dusk, you find yourself feeling unusually calm, grounded by the soft ritual of sharing these stories. You realize poetry, in all its forms, is a bridge between worlds, the harsh and the gentle, the present and the eternal. Before parting ways for the evening, Tomo folds her notebook carefully and looks up. "Thank you," she says quietly, "for showing me that poetry isn't just words. It's a way of seeing." You smile warmly. "And a way of being." You watch her walk away, the fading light tracing the outline of a warrior who carries both sword and poem within her. The night has fallen deep and quiet, the sky a velvet blanket dotted with countless stars. A soft breeze rustles through the paper lanterns hanging outside, their warm glow flickering gently like distant fireflies. You settle into your usual spot by the window, the familiar creak of the wooden frames soothing in the stillness. Tonight, your thoughts wander over the many lessons of poetry and the samurai, their strange, beautiful marriage of blade and brush, discipline and art. It's easy to imagine those centuries ago when warriors composed verses before breakfast, when poetry was part of the daily rhythm, as necessary as sharpening a sword or polishing armor. You remember Tomo's hesitant first strokes and the way her writing grew more assured, the subtle humor in her humble brag death poem, the playful duel of verses beneath the fading light. She's not just learning how to write, she's learning how to listen to the world in a softer, sharper way. This quiet practice, you realize, is what makes the samurai's life feel so complete, a balance of strength and sensitivity that modern life often forgets. Before you drift off yourself, you think about the way poetry can carry us through both calm and storm. How it captures fleeting moments, the smell of rain, the fall of a blossom, the quiet steady breath of the morning. How, even in the face of hardship, it reminds us that there is beauty to be found. And in that beauty, perhaps, a kind of peace. You take a deep breath, letting the night wrap around you like a gentle song. The brush rests beside you, ink dried but ready for tomorrow's quiet inspiration. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let yourself drift. Sleep well.